But you didn't check it. No, that's okay. That's why I'm telling everybody stuff now. Okay, let me make sure that the stream's running. Stream's running. That's the rain. Okay, so for those of us that actually check our Blackboards, Blackboard was down for like 2 days at least, so that was fun. It was especially bad for my online class who could only get their material through Blackboard. So Monday was a wash. Boy, that rain's great. So the schedule as it sits for us. We're going to finish chapter 10 today. It shouldn't take too long. We've got 7, 8 slides left. Monday is going to be our review, which is technically our last day of class. So come in Monday, study guides are already up on Blackboard. The rest of the PowerPoint's up on Blackboard already, so you can look it over and have an idea of what we're going to be going over. Also, Monday is when the paper's due. So for those of us in here, if you could physically bring it in, that'd be great. If you can hear me over the rain, that'd be great. Obviously, online folks, just email it to me and I will sift through everything. If you guys can't bring it in due to printers being what they are, email them to me. Preferably my Francis Marion email. It's a lot easier. riley.holt@fmarion.edu. I'm still having a hard time.
Because I tried to email you, but it's always like, he don't do this. So, what is it?
Riley.holt, RILEY .HOLT, and it's at fmarion.edu. I know for you students it's like g.fmarion.edu. It's just at fmarion.edu.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So yeah, that's my email. You can email me whenever about whatever, but if you need to send me papers, please send it there. If you send it to my Gmail, that's fine, but again, it's more likely to get lost there because boy, I get sent a whole lot of junk. What else? Oh, okay, yeah, so I know, right? I really wish I was at home asleep. Well, we gotta finish this. Right, so review on Monday, and we have now confirmed that the final is next Wednesday, so a week from today, in here, regular time, 8:30. You have 2 hours to do it. You will not need 2 hours to do it. It's not going to be any different than any of the others. Just that it's going to cover more material, and therefore it's going to be less like questions from each. Yes? The final is next Wednesday, yes. Tuesday is technically reading day. Monday is still our last day of class, the way they have it set up, so that's going to be our review day. Yes. Yeah, it works. It makes a little more sense when you're like, it makes more sense on the main campus, but for like a Monday, Wednesday class, reading day doesn't really do anything. But yeah, for us, it's fine. For you online folks, I'll put the test up on Wednesday as well and just like leave it through the end of the week. So please take it as soon as possible so we'll know if there's any issues, especially with as problematic as Blackboard has been, because I only have until the following week to get everything graded and all the grades in or I'm in trouble. So get stuff done. Yeah. Again, as far as dates and stuff, you guys have it easy. My Tuesday, Thursday class, which is a 10 o'clock class, has their exam on Friday at 8:30. I know.
We do? No, we don't.
If you have a 10 o'clock Tuesday, Thursday class, that's when you have to come in.
We have Monday, Wednesday.
Do you have to come in Friday? Ew.
That's
Well, have fun with that. So any questions before we start? Yeah, all the exams are 8:30.
Fridays are my day that I go to sleep in the morning. I got nothing to do.
Okay, well, let's jump into the notes. This is where we ended. I went through this really quickly last time, so we'll go into it in a bit more detail now. There was the disagreement among the poor whites against the planters. Meanwhile, in Europe and South America, slavery was being abolished. As we mentioned many times, after 1808, well, 1807 was the actual year that they pushed for the ending of the slave trade, but 1808 was when it was put into law. 1834, Britain emancipated its slaves. It was 1848 before France did the same, leaving America much, much later. In fact, I mentioned this to my Tuesday, Thursday class as well. In Russia, they didn't have slaves so much as they had serfs, which were essentially slaves. They were peasants that were tied to the land. So if like a landowner sold the land, the serfs had to stay there and continue working the land. They weren't sold like slaves were as individual property, but they were considered part of the property. Like if the land was sold, the serfs had to go with it. And the serfs were freed before America ended slavery, so somehow Russia was ahead of us in that regard. So, go America. The Spanish colonies that were gaining independence, like Mexico, Nicaragua, also banned slavery. So, yeah, there was a lot of outside pressure. Not to say there was other countries that were like, hey, you need to do the thing or we're going to declare war on you. But there was a lot of like outside moral pressure to end slavery. Within the United States, we had Quakers and Enlightenment thinkers who were against slavery because, keeping humans as property is typically seen as a bad thing. So the planters in the South used their power to bind white Southerners closer together. As we'd seen with the Three-Fifths Compromise, Southern states that had more slaves had more political power. And the candidates that the poor white Southerners would be voting for were typically the planters with high education. So regardless of whether they liked the planters or not, those were going to be the candidates anyway. Planters also used this, and we would see this later. We'll talk about this next semester with the Gilded Age. But when you have these people with all this money, they use it in this philanthropic sense to gain support among the rest of the populace, less out of the goodness of their hearts and more because it's good for them. So they use their wealth and resources to aid poorer whites, from charity and credit to seasonal employment, and then using the arguments of Thomas Dew to bring them all together, which is to say, even if you're bottom of the barrel, landless, poor white laborer who can't read or write, due to racial superiority, you're still better than African Americans because racism. And then also this idea that slavery was good because reasons. but also and this is a thing that's still being used today in certain circles, this idea of like racial pride of, oh, we're the best and we can do anything, but also this racial fear of, but these minorities are going to get us, to win the uneducated to their side. This is one of my favorite images. This is a group of freed blacks being moved from a steamboat, and there's someone there, you can see to the left, having issue with it, and the guy there in the hat, well, I mean, they're all in hats, but the guy here, I should probably point with my cursor in case my online people are actually paying attention. The guy here, that's a Quaker, and he's just going to body block this guy and like, yes. He's just going to body block this guy, not let him get involved while these people get off the boat and continue on. Because again, they were a big proponent of emancipation and getting the slaves out of bondage. And while they were typically opposed to violence, they were not against inconveniencing people while those they were protecting got away. Quakers were pretty cool people, typically. So, on from one mistreated group to another, the natives. So we had the Second Seminole War. A group of Seminole natives continued fighting back against federal authorities in Florida. Andrew Jackson, being the native murderer that he was, figured that it wouldn't take long to get rid of them. However, the Seminole leader, Osceola, and the African Americans who had fled to Florida for freedom managed to outlast Jackson's term. Some African Americans were actually re-enslaved by the Seminoles. I was going to butcher that name for a second. They were still treated nearly as equals, so they had far more loyalty to the Seminoles and wished to fight for them rather than be recaptured by American forces. And it wasn't until 1842 that the Seminoles were defeated, when Osceola was lured into an army camp with false promises of peace settlement, only to be taken captive. Because that's something that American armies are really good at doing, is promising safe conduct and a peace agreement, and then just like capturing the enemy leader. Especially when it came to natives. Meanwhile, the Cherokees continued to resist in court. We've mentioned John Ross already, but we're just going to mention him again here in case we've got short memory spans. I hope you guys don't have short memory spans, because it's going to be on the test. John Ross, the Cherokee leader who led this charge. So in Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that Native tribes were domestic dependent nations. So for a short period of time, the Native tribes were considered their own sovereign powers, but this was overturned by the next year. Treaty of New Echota. A small group of Native men agreed to move the Cherokee Nation from 100 million acres to 35 million acres across the Mississippi, which again, anytime we talk about moving the natives across the Mississippi, that's moving them not only a good 1,000 miles, but also to land they've never seen. Obviously, John Ross opposed this, but Congress passed the law by a single vote, or the treaty, rather. And this led eventually to the Trail of Tears, in which the final 15,000 Cherokee natives were forced from their ancestral lands to this new land across the Mississippi. Disease, lack of supplies, and starvation killed a lot of them before they ever even got there. And obviously the army moving them wasn't really concerned about that. And the book even mentions that, like, the remaining Cherokees completed the Trail of Tears, which came to be known in March 1839. Thousands remained near starvation a year later. So here's the Seminoles fighting against an American fort. Some of the major battles of the various Seminole Wars. You can see the many forts there. That's why we have so many forts in Florida. There's John Ross again. Just the best image out there of him. And it's a really good image, so why not use it again? And here's the movement of the various tribes to what was supposed to be Indian territory, but it just ended up really being, where's my mouse? Like this corner up here. Not all of this, but just this corner. Yeah. Okay, gotta keep moving. Here's one most of you should, well, you probably know about. I don't know how many of us know how this actually went down. The Battle for Texas. Just gonna throw my pen real quick. So the Mexicans overthrew the Spanish rule in 1921. They allowed for U.S. migrants to come into eastern Texas, mostly to form a buffer zone against the Comanche natives, because the Comanche natives were very, very powerful and were causing trouble along the northern Mexican border. So it's like, hey, why not let some of the Americans come in and deal with them rather than us? And we'll just it's like, oh, here, you can have some good land, and we'll just let you deal with the natives. Now, Mexico had already outlawed slavery, but they allowed the U.S. planters to come in and bring slaves on their own because, hey, we know they're going to want to bring slaves, and the more of them, the more people that show up, the more they can hold off the natives. So a term showing up here is Tejano, Mexican culture that developed in Texas, mixed Catholicism, Spanish language and culture, and indigenous customs. This was the main culture in that region at the time, this mix of the various regional cultures. Obviously, the Americans, being Americans, didn't want to have anything to do with these strange customs because, oh, Catholics are scary and Spanish is hard and, all of that. So they kept themselves separate, worshiped as Protestants, spoke English, et cetera, et cetera. And Americans, being the greedy bastards that they are, as they grew in number, they began demanding independence. Now, I remember this being explained to me like it's weird to give it an analogy like this, but if, say, there was really good farmland in Western Canada and they let people from Alaska like move in temporarily, or not even temporarily, like move in not as citizens but as like special immigrants. They gave them even not even like restricted rights, but special rights that they could do things that regular Canadians couldn't do. And then the Americans, after a few years, decided that they wanted to take that land away from Canada that they had been given special rights to use. Like, that feels really entitled, I think would be the word. Like, here, you can use this land that is technically ours, but we're going to give you guys special rights and stuff that you can use. And then after a while, it's like, oh, we're going to take it. Like, that wasn't the deal. It wasn't like they were being mistreated. However, due to all of this, a nationalist leader, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who we will discuss again before the end of class today, I hope, or we're going to have to do stuff on Monday before we do the thing. He wanted to rein in the Tejanos because they had their own separate line of thought from like mainstream Mexico, as well as to curb the American settlers who wanted more and more concessions. So eventually the Americans formed a rebellion. They declared Eastern Texas an independent republic. Some elite Tejanos joined them because they saw it as a good business opportunity. Again, much like the American War for Independence was largely economic. And this eventually led to the Alamo, which Texas sees as something akin to an Independence Day. And much like our Independence Day, it wasn't actually important. Our Independence Day, we signed a piece of paper. Their Alamo, a bunch of idiots got killed. March 6, 1836, General Santa Anna crushed the soldiers defending the fort, killed all the men, but the women and children were set free. They weren't like taken prisoner and made to march to Mexico or anything. Davy Crockett was famously there. Supposedly it was this real grand historic last stand. But it was just a bunch of Americans trying to take Spanish land, honestly. Or Mexican land. It wasn't Spanish anymore. So the U.S. decided it was going to remain neutral officially, but it sent aid to the rebels. Many Americans went to help, including General Sam Houston. So while we were technically neutral, we sent a damn general in there to lead the totally not pro-rebel forces. And they did manage to start pushing the Mexican forces back. I now can't tell if that's the train or the rain. However, all this was happening during an election year, so they actually passed a gag rule, and that they just weren't going to talk about Texas for that year, because they knew if they did, it would bring in talks about whether or not Texas should be a slave state or a free state, and talks about bringing Texas into the Union was going to be a whole thing. Oops. So they were just like, we're just not going to talk about this. This is an election year. Just, we're literally going to pass a rule for for Congress that we're just not going to talk about it. They eventually have to get into it, but at the moment, they're just not going to talk about it. Anyway, this is the best image I could find for Tejanos. There's General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. The Alamo. Pro tip, good way to get shot. Standing up on the corner and waving a flag. Here's General Sam Houston, totally not officially supporting any rebellion or anything. Okay. Gotta keep moving. So 1837, we'll get back to Texas, don't you worry. Well, I mean, Texas is kind of a done deal. They pushed the Mexican forces back, so eastern Texas was kind of its own thing. We'll do some imperialism a little bit later. So Jackson had himself a little tuberculosis, which, isn't a big deal, just coughing up blood. So the Democratic Convention put Vice President Martin Van Buren on the ticket. The opposition party, known as the Whigs, which is interesting considering that's like an old British party, but, whatever. Try to do like Jackson had done originally and bring together diverse groups that opposed Jackson's policies, but this group ended up being so diverse they had, how many? 3 separate candidates? Yeah, there we go. They had 3 separate candidates that split the field so broadly that Van Buren won pretty easily. And then the next year, there was the Panic of 1837. Almost as soon as Van Buren became president, the economy just crapped itself. So, during the 1830s, Britain had been investing heavily in cotton, and not just like buying raw cotton from the United States because they had their textile mills, but if you so much as decided to start a business that was related in some way to cotton, Britain would give you massive loans. If you were starting a cotton plantation, if you were starting a brokerage firm to give loans to cotton farmers, if you were running some kind of shipping facility, even internal development, they were funding canals and roads and railroads even, if it was in any way related to the cotton industry, because the textile industry was the industry in Britain. So there was a lot of money coming over here. However, all of that British money began causing inflation, which started raising prices, which, is a thing we may now be familiar with. However, England started having issues of its own. Due to some bad harvests and the declining demand for textiles, England started pulling back its flow of credit. So suddenly this seemingly endless wave of British money started to dry up. So the British investors started to call in their loans. And suddenly not only were these loans no longer just flowing out of Britain, but now the investors wanted their loans back. And usually the people that were taking the loans were in no place to pay them back right away, especially as cotton prices in the United States began to fall because as I mentioned, demand for textiles in Britain also began to fall. Textiles, if you're not familiar, is just a fancy term for anything you use cloth for. Typically clothes, but in any kind of cloth material. So cotton prices fell by half in less than a year. Land prices were decimated. And when land price drops, it just radiates to everything else. Shipping, cities, frontier, northern brokers. It just hit everything. So due to a shift in Britain, and as we've seen, 2/3 of America's economy being cotton, everything broke at once. Many Americans blame Jackson's war on the bank for the panic. As we saw before, Jackson had vetoed the excuse me, sorry about that. As Jackson had vetoed the recharter of the, let me make sure that, I hope this thing's been on the whole time. Okay, good. That would have been a bad time to find out. Jackson vetoed the recharter of the Second Bank of America, or not the Bank of America, the National Bank. And while people were happy with it at the time, all of a sudden we've got this economic disaster and there's no federal bank to level things out. Also, Van Buren, who obviously was just going to continue Jackson's policies, did not want to use federal aid to stop the panic at all. So the panic continued for 4 more years. So basically, Van Buren's entire Van Buren's entire presidency was beset by this economic panic. So there's Van Buren looking a little sad. Here's an interesting one. The modern Colossus. Can't stretch any farther without splitting myself asunder. So Van Buren trying to straddle the Democratic platform and the Whig abolitionist platform, which is clearly crumbling because it doesn't have a solid base or something. And we have the times, people living in destitution, and there's some kind of weird freaking floating hat in the sky. I don't know what that's about. There's a hot air balloon crashing in the background. There's a lot of symbolism here I don't quite get, but you know. Okay. Should be able to knock the rest of this out. So, in 1840, Van Buren was vulnerable. Obviously, didn't have a very good first term. And the Whigs brought a strong candidate forward. William Henry Harrison, 68-year-old soldier, was brought in. Was a wealthy planter in Virginia. However, they portrayed him as a self-made man, lived in a log cabin in Indiana, and a hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. You know, political propaganda. They paired him with the former Democrat John Tyler, also from Virginia, opposed Jackson's stand on nullification to bring in the Southern vote, because you always want someone in power who disagrees with keeping the Union together. So they held rallies, barbecues, parades, mass meetings to appeal to the common man. Much like with how Jackson's campaign was run, they used his title in the rallies, the slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too. You know, John Tyler was there, I guess. They welcomed women to these events, circulated petitions against Cherokee removal, organized temperance associations, joined religious revivals. And while they could not vote and there was no real push for suffrage, they did rely on the moral virtues of women to spread the message. For example, Whig Senator Daniel Webster spoke to a group of 1,200 women, praising the virtues and asking them to encourage their husbands and brothers to vote Whig, because, again, that was all the political power women had was, you know, tell your husbands and brothers to vote the way they should vote. And then Harrison won handily in 1840. The Whigs gained a majority in Congress. Things were looking up. Anybody familiar with William Henry Harrison at all? No? Nobody knows what he's famous for? Because he died 30 days later. He gave like a 2-hour-long inaugural speech in the rain at, let me remind you, 68 years old in 1840, and died 30 days later of pneumonia.
That's not funny.
It's been like 150 years. It's okay. It's been almost 200 years, actually. It's fine. So this left the presidency to John Tyler, who was less of a Whig reformer, so nothing really happened in those 4 years, so the Democrats were able to regroup for the next election. So yeah, there was this whole big to-do about all the stuff William Henry Harrison would do and all the changes he would make, and the Whigs gained all this power, and then the dude just died. I mean, there was all these different, like, the Tippecanoe procession, all this amazing, like, campaign art. General William Henry Harrison, the hero, the Patriots' home. You've got that log cabin up there. Mouse. Presidential inauguration of William Henry Harrison, 2 hours long, in the rain, and then he croaked. Well, after that, 1844, Democrat James K. Polk was against the Whig Henry Clay. Their main focus was territorial expansion, not just into the West, but even as far as Cuba and Nicaragua. That comes next semester. The main concern, though, was the reoccupation of Oregon and annexation of Texas, because, again, Texas was now under, let me phrase this properly. It was under the control of Americans, but not under the control of the American government. And it wished for annexation, but they knew that that would cause issues with Mexico, so they needed to be ready for that. As far as Oregon, it was shared with Britain, but they wanted to take it entirely, and that also could cause issues, so we'll get to that. Clay didn't have a real major stance on Texas, so Polk won this election. And before Polk was even made president, Florida and Texas were made states. This was when the idea of manifest destiny came about. John S. Sullivan wrote about it, saying that the American expansion of the Pacific was manifest destiny, or the nation's God-given right to expand its borders. You know, because God said so, we can genocide the natives and make war with anybody in our way. We nearly had a war with Britain over Oregon. Well, then we made a treaty instead, which I know isn't as exciting as talking about a war, but for the diplomats at the time, I'm sure that felt really good. They didn't have to start another war. A lot less paperwork. They admitted Iowa and Wisconsin to balance the power, because Florida and Texas obviously would be slave states. We'll talk more about Texas in a little bit. Obviously, all this land they were claiming was typically occupied by natives. They were either forced out by the settlers there or forced into interaction with other native tribes. And as we've said, native tribes were not some large homogeneous group. They were entirely separate nations, entirely separate cultures, and if you force one tribe into another tribe's land, they're going to be seen as invaders. In Texas, for example, as we've mentioned already, the Comanche tribe was this incredibly powerful nation. They forged ties with other native nations, commercial ties with Mexican and Anglo-American merchants, but they also were the ones in control there. After Mexico won its independence from Spain, they could not maintain the level of gifts required to keep the Comanches happy, so they renewed their raids into the northern provinces of Mexico, which is why the Mexican nation had the Americans come into eastern Texas to begin with. So there's 1844. Here's a depiction of Manifest Destiny. That's just a depiction of Columbia there, this idea of the spirit of America. And by extension, civilization moving westward, pushing out the darkness. As you can see, there's this real distinction of light and dark. Forcing out the natives, running the beasts westward as well. You've got the buffalo, the bears here being pushed westward as they're moving stagecoaches, telegraph lines, railroads, just extremely racist and very genocidal. And here's John S. Sullivan. Other nations have tried to check the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to ever spare the continent allotted by Providence or the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Yeah. Just, ignoring the people already there. And again, not just the natives, but like the Mexican/Spanish folks living in the Southwest had been there for hundreds of years before Jamestown ever existed. So, this was Oregon country. This was the entirety of Oregon. And we eventually split it along this line here. Britain kept Vancouver Island. Vancouver Island is quite lovely. I've not actually been there myself, but I have seen a lot of it. It's a very, very pretty bit of land up there, Oregon. And then the various tribes down in Mexico and the Texas region. Got the Apaches, the Navajo, and of course, the Comanchera, the region of the Comanches. We'll discuss this disputed territory in just a minute, which I think is literally the next slide. Because this is the line that Mexico wanted, and this is the line that we wanted, and this is going to cause an issue. Yep. Okay. We are very nearly done. We've got like 2 more slides. Obviously, after Texas was admitted to the Union, there was a lot of tension between the U.S. and Mexico over where the western border would be, which again, let me just bring this up. This is roughly where the Nueces River is. That was the next point that I was pulling up, but then I went back. And this is the Rio Grande. There's a rather large difference here, considering this is about the size of one of our regular states over here. So yeah, keep that in mind. So yeah, Mexico wanted the border to be at the Nueces River. Americans wanted land as far as the Rio Grande, because obviously, I put Rio Grande River, I'm dumb. Rio Grande means great, big river, river. Anyway, because I didn't do that later. Anyway, January 1846, Polk sent John Slidell to negotiate with Mexico, offering the president, Jose Herrera, $30 million for New Mexico and California, along with the Rio Grande border. So not just like, hey, we'll do what we want with Texas, but also we want New Mexico and California. And by New Mexico, I mean like basically all of Southwest, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, all of that. That's all considered New Mexico. However, because we're Americans and we can't just leave things alone, he also sent forces under Zachary Taylor across the Nueces River, which was considered, again, by Mexico to be the border between America and Mexico. So this was seen as, hey, they're sending an ambassador to talk to us. Oh, but they're also literally sending troops across the border. What's this bullshit? So they refused to see Slidell and sent their own troops across the Rio Grande, which again, Mexico sees as being within Mexican territory and Americans see as being within American territory, because it's this big disputed zone between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And again, the U.S. being the U.S., not taking any chances, sent naval forces to take San Francisco should hostilities arise. I should mention, this is before the Panama Canal. These naval forces had to have been sent before Slidell was ever sent to Texas, because they had to go around South America. So they just had boats, ships, I should say, sitting off the coast of San Francisco, ready to raise hell as soon as the shooting started. Fighting did finally erupt near the Rio Grande. Polk claimed American blood had been shed on American soil, which again, the land was disputed, and it was much closer to what was understood to be Mexican soil, but whatever. Propaganda doesn't care. Whigs did protest going to war, including a certain Abraham Lincoln, nobody important. Congress did vote for war. Of course, the South was behind the war because, hey, more land. Even many in the North supported the war because it would allow for greater commercial expansion. The war was very one-sided. This was not a drawn-out war. American forces captured Texas and California territory, quickly moving into Mexico. Santa Anna took over the presidency again in 1847. Carl M. from the Alamo. I sure hope you remember like 3 slides ago. He's back. He did stall the American offensive temporarily, but soon American forces were marching on the capital of Mexico. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which basically took the offered 30 mil and cut it in half and said, hey, we'll give you this for Texas, north of Rio Grande, like we said, New Mexico, and California. So all this stuff that we wanted to begin with, we're going to take it and give you half what we offered, along with all your dead soldiers. And again, this, I'm not sure which was the first one, 1847, 1846. So that must have been this one. Here. It's technically east of the Rio Grande, but it's, or this one here, maybe. But it's right on the border. And this is all disputed territory. So you've got disputed territory here, you've got land up here that was annexed, and then you've got Mexican territory. Not one bit of fighting took place on actual U.S. soil. And as you can see, U.S. naval forces had to come up from way down here. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. The book doesn't mention this. The U.S. troops landed in was that Marzatán to march into the interior. There was a lot of war crimes happening there. They killed a lot of civilians, and then they rolled up and attacked San Francisco. This actually reminds me of one of my medieval images for my European history class. It's like, I don't think they engaged at this close to range. But, you do you. Okay, almost done. So, obviously, with the war with Mexico and knowing that Texas was going to be taken, as well as all this land to the southwest, which was going to be technically south of the Missouri Compromise line. Northern Democrats joined the Whigs in their opposition to the power of slavery to govern the country, its constitution, and laws. Which, again, is interesting because Democrats at this time were the conservative party. They were the ones who were typically on board with slavery. It's weird that there were any Northern Democrats, but that was the thing. The Wilmot Proviso, written by the Democrat Congressman David Wilmot. Thanks, Wilmot. To outlaw slavery in all territories gained from Mexico. It managed to pass the House, but obviously Southerners and pro-slavery Northern Democrats killed it in the Senate because that wasn't gonna make it. 1848 was a rather intense election due to all this land now being brought into the United States and the idea of how slavery was going to be handled. A question of whether slavery will be allowed in the newly acquired lands, as I said. Polk just didn't want to be involved, so he just didn't run a second term. Democrats nominated Lewis Cass, expansionist who wanted to purchase Cuba, seize all of Oregon, more of Mexico, and also suggesting states choose their slavery status to appeal to the Northerners. I guess that would appeal to Northerners. I don't know. It would kind of throw the whole Missouri Compromise thing up in the air. Whigs nominated Zachary Taylor, who was a war hero, Louisiana slaveholder, no political experience. He actually had no stance on the Western slavery issue, but his vice presidential candidate was from New York and actually opposed this annexation. And then we had the Liberty Party, also known as the Free Soil Party, who completely opposed slavery, but not on moral grounds, on the grounds of it empowering aristocrats. So it wasn't like, hey, owning people is bad. It was more about we shouldn't give more power to the people with all the power. Also, the Liberty Party brought Van Buren back. So Van Buren's back. The Liberty Party didn't do much, but they did split the vote in New York and gave Zachary Taylor the win. So the Whigs were technically victorious, but it was only by putting a Southern slaveholder in the White House. Not exactly what the Whigs were looking for in terms of a victory. So we've got the map there. This is the same sort of, Zachary Taylor got the same sort of treatment as Jackson did when it came to like anti-that guy propaganda. An available candidate, the one qualification for a Whig president. It's like, you guys, they said that about Jackson. Be creative. Yes, he fought in a war. Most presidents at this time had. Wasn't that literally the thing about freaking William Henry Harrison? He's a war hero. It's like, he's also old and he died in 30 days. I'm sorry. Okay, conclusion. By the middle of the 1800s, most Americans believed expansion to be necessary. So the slaveholders saw this expansion as vital to their institution, that being cotton and slavery. Northerners were willing to leave it alone as long as slavery remained out of these newly acquired lands. Obviously, you can't both expand slavery and also not have it in newly acquired lands. And as lands were taken from Mexico, the debate over slavery intensified. Northerners joined slaves, natives, and Mexicans in protesting the expansion. We had political realignments. Anti-slavery sentiment grew in the North. Pro-slavery ideology I can't talk today. I'm tired. Pro-slavery ideology deep into the South. We also had, and this is only mentioned at the end, Solomon Northrop's 12 Years a Slave painted vivid pictures of life in bondage concerning planters who believed that slavery was the greatest of all the great blessings which Providence has bestowed upon our glorious region. Yeah, guys, do you ever look at your plantations, or do you live in the cities and leave them to your overseers? So the further insistence on the South for pro-slavery antagonized the North. Their economy was shaped by commercial and industrial developments and the free labor expansion, which didn't go so well with the slavery expansion. So that's that. We are actually done 10 minutes early. We'll review on Monday. That's all we'll do on Monday. So at least look over your study guides before we come in on Monday, because I don't want to sit here and stare at you guys until somebody finds the answer. Because the sooner we get on Monday, the sooner we're done. But yeah, if you can, bring your papers in. If not, just email them. Y'all have a good weekend. Stay dry out there. Nia, don't hurt yourself.
I'm like accident. I don't lie. I don't know why.
Watch the corner down there.
Huh?
Watch the corner.
Thank you. I figured out why my paper never sent. So I'm sending it to the wrong email.
That'll do it.
Yes. Sorry.
Well, send it again. I'll grade it.
I plan on sending you, if you're not too busy, I plan on sending you like around Friday is when I'm really gonna like, cause I've already started working on it, but like I'm adding like I'm like finalizing it, you know what I mean? So you said it was okay if I send you samples, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
And I was wondering, like, will you mean like quotes in each paragraph? Do you mean like in-text citation?
It doesn't like be in each paragraph, but like just say, bleh. The like MLA citations, like for the sources that you use. As far as like quotes, just disperse them as you see fit. Just as long as, just to show, like I said, that you're using this stuff. It's a history thing apparently.
Okay.
And that's how I was taught, and it does kind of add a little gravitas to your paper, that you're like using like another historian's words to bring your stuff to life, or even using like someone from that time. In fact, I think let's see. Yeah, actually, here they said Captain Alexander Hamilton of the New York Company of Artillery, by applying to the publisher of this publication, may learn of something of his profit, said an advertisement that appeared in the Pennsylvania Evening Post of January 1st, 1777. That's a good quote. The only problem is she didn't cite it. If she had done a citation there,
You would want in parentheses the author and the date, right?
yes.
Okay.
Or if it's like, if it's a website, just like, what the name of the article was or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, if she had just done citations, this would have been like a perfect 100 paper, because it's written well, it was good citations. Like even here, William Alexander was known as Lord Stirling. That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, just little stuff. I mean, it's written well is always a great start. But yeah, just like a couple of quotes here and there. And she's got a good, couple of good works cited here. Pennsylvania Evening Post. I mean, 1777. That's a primary source document right there, which you don't have to do. But it's always fun. And actually, look, these are some. Those are some those are letters. Founders Online National Archives. Those are letters between Hamilton and Washington. That's pretty cool. Which again, I'm not saying that that's what you need to do, but I just noticed it.
Okay.
But yeah, just if you do a quotation, make sure you cite it. That's very important. Obviously, I'm not gonna hit you guys for plagiarism. That's technically plagiarism, but I know you're not trying to do plagiarism. But yeah, just cite it. And yeah, you'll be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. You too. Take care. Oh, I left the mic on. Sorry. Yeah. So we're going to be reviewing on Monday, and I'll have the paper or the I can't talk. We'll do the test on Wednesday. I'll leave that up until like Wednesday or Friday, I guess. Yeah. Talk to y'all later on. Bye for now.